Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is pretty laser-focused. We're diving into a really complex and frankly sensitive chapter in the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
That's right. We're looking at the institutional ban that stopped men of Black African descent from holding the priesthood. It ran for well over a century.
And for you, the listener, we want to give you a really solid grasp of the nuances here.
The real core of what we're looking at is this clash between what was taught for decades, that this ban was a God-mandated doctrine, and the Church's more recent efforts, especially since 2013, to completely recontextualize that history.
Okay, so let's unpack that. The period is from the mid-1800s to 1978. Before we get to the why, what did this ban practically mean for Black members? It went way beyond just church leadership roles, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The effect was monumental. Devastating, really. Being denied the priesthood meant you were cut off from performing what they call saving ordinances.
And just for anyone less familiar, what are those saving ordinances exactly?
They're the key temple rituals. Think baptisms for the dead, endowments, and most critically, sealing.
Sealing. So that's being sealed to your family for eternity.
Exactly. A Black man couldn't receive his own temple endowment, and he couldn't be sealed to his wife or his children. In LDS theology, those rights are considered absolutely essential for exaltation, which is the highest level of salvation.
So we're not talking about earthly status. This was about your eternal destiny.
It was about everything. Your eternal family, your place in the celestial kingdom, everything.
Okay, that raises the stakes dramatically. If the consequence was that severe, the authority behind it must have been presented as unshakable.
It was. While Brigham Young is the one who announced it publicly in 1852, you have later church presidents, Joseph Fielding Smith, for instance, who repeatedly insisted the doctrine actually came from the founding prophet, Joseph Smith himself.
So they were anchoring it to the very foundation of the church.
They had to. We see multiple official statements from the first presidency, the top governing body, calling it a direct commandment from the Lord. They were very clear. This is doctrine, not just a policy or, an opinion.
And apostles used language to really hammer that home, right? That doctrine can't be changed.
They did. You have figures like Boyd K. Packer who taught that doctrine is fixed, eternal. So if you're a faithful member hearing this from the highest authorities, you accept it. You accept that this is just God's order of things for now.
So if it was doctrine, there had to be a doctrinal explanation.
Yeah.
And the sources point to two main justifications. The first is probably the one most people have heard of, the curse of Cain.
That's the big one. The teaching was that black skin was the mark of Cain from the Bible, and that this lineage came down through Noah's son, Ham.
And Brigham Young was pretty explicit about this.
Oh, very. He's quoted as teaching that the curse would stay in place until, and this is his phrase, all the other descendants of Adam had received their priesthood blessings first.
So it was framed as a temporary hold, but on a cosmic timeline.
Exactly. But that only explains the earthly restriction. It doesn't explain why certain spirits were born into that lineage to begin with.
Which brings us to the second rationale, the premortal life.
Right. This leverages the LDS belief that we all existed as spirits before birth, and leaders like Harold B. Lee and Joseph Fielding Smith taught that people of African descent were born with these restrictions because they were, quote, less valiant in that premortal life.
Less valiant in the war in heaven.
That was the implication, that they had committed some act or acts performed before they were born. So your moral race was seen as a direct reflection of your premortal performance.
Wow. That's a perfect theological feedback loop. Cain explains the mark on earth, and the pre-existence explains why you got the mark in the first place.
It provided a complete, deeply troubling explanation. And the seriousness of it all was really underlined by the teachings on interracial marriage.
Yeah, let's get into that because the historical quotes here they're genuinely shocking.
They are. According to Brigham Young's own teachings, it was a life or death issue. He said that mixing one's seed with the seed of Cain brought the same curse and that the penalty should be death on the spot.
Death on the spot. That is incredibly severe.
It shows the level of fear and separation they were trying to enforce. And this wasn't just a 19th century thing.
Right. This thinking persisted for a long time.
A very long time. You have Apostle Mark E. Peterson in 1954 saying that even one drop of Negro blood would pass the curse on. He basically argued that God had created segregation, so who were they to change it?
So this wasn't just social prejudice. It was baked into their theology as a divine command to preserve a pure lineage for the priesthood.
That was the rationale.
Which, of course, creates a massive theological problem. The church's whole mission is to take the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. How do you do that if you're also enforcing a doctrine that blocks an entire race from full salvation?
You can't. Not forever. And that contradiction really hit a crisis point in the 1970s as the church was growing globally.
And the sources say the tipping point was Brazil, specifically. Why there?
Because Brazil, as a nation, has such a deeply mixed racial heritage. The old one-drop rule became practically impossible and, frankly, ethically horrifying to enforce there.
It would have excluded a huge portion of their members.
A huge portion. And the sources highlight this really powerful detail. Faithful Black members had donated money to build the new São Paulo temple, knowing full well that, under the current rules, they themselves would never be allowed to enter it.
Wow. That's a powerful image, that hypocrisy became unavoidable.
It was just unsustainable. The internal contradiction and the external pressure finally came to a head.
Which leads us to June 1978 and the revelation.
Right. President Spencer W. Kimball announced that he'd received a revelation to remove the restriction. It's now canonized as Official Declaration 2 in their scriptures.
But even the story of how that revelation came about is interesting. There are kind of two different versions, aren't there?
There are, and the difference is telling. On one hand, you have Apostle Gordon B. Hinckley, who described it as this purely divine moment, a hallowed and sanctified atmosphere, where a conduit opened between the heavenly throne.
The classic top-down revelation narrative.
Exactly. It frames it as this singular supernatural event. But then you have the account from another apostle, LeGrand Richards.
And his version is much more procedural.
Far more. He describes President Kimball meeting with each of the 12 apostles one by one, asking them to pray about it, then having a group discussion, and finally presenting a written announcement that they all approved by vote.
Which sounds a lot more like a board meeting than a flash of divine light.
Well, both can be true, of course, but Richard's version grounds the event in intense human deliberation driven by the real-world problem of the Brazil temple. Hinckley's version emphasizes the miraculous. The institution needs both narratives.
Fascinating. Okay, let's fast forward. It's the 2010s. The internet is a thing. All this difficult history is easily accessible. The church has to respond.
They do. And in 2013, they published the Race and the Priesthood essay on their official website.
What was the goal with that essay? What were they trying to do?
The main goal was, you could say, doctrinal triage. It was an attempt to finally get out ahead of the history, to clean house on all the old explanations.
So what do they do with them? The curse of Cain, pre-mortal life.
They disavowed them, all of them. The essay officially states that all those past explanations, the curse, the lack of valiance, the sin of mixed marriage, are not doctrine. It recategorizes them as mere theories, folklore, things that were just products of their time.
That is a seismic shift. I mean, to go from eternal doctrine from God to racist folklore from men.
It's a complete reversal. And in doing that, they shift the source of the error from God to humans, which leads to the essay's other big move, attributing the blame.
And they put it squarely on Brigham Young.
That's right. The essay says Young announced the ban, influenced by the widespread racist ideas of his time. It's a strategic move that effectively insulates the founding prophet, Joseph Smith, from the policy.
So the error becomes historical and cultural, not foundational.
Precisely. But that creates its own set of problems.
Because if leaders for 100 years, prophets who claim to talk to God, all taught this as doctrine.
Yeah.
What does that say about prophetic authority?
That is the core issue. Even LDS historians like Richard Bushman have pointed this out. He said that if Brigham Young could make an error this serious, one that was then upheld by prophet after prophet, it drains the ban of revelatory significance and brings into question all of the prophet's inspiration.
It calls the whole system into question. If they were that wrong for that long on something that impacted eternal salvation,
what else could they be wrong about? That's the question critics ask. They argue that calling it theory is an attempt to rewrite history and avoid admitting that prophets led the church astray on a massive scale.
So this creates this cognitive dissonance that has to ripple down to the local level. Which brings us to what this looks like on the ground. The official essay is on the website, so members are encouraged to study it, right?
You would think so, but not always smoothly. The sources highlight this really telling case of a man named Brian Dawson.
The Sunday school teacher. What happened with him?
So Dawson, who is married to a Black woman, was teaching a youth class. A student asked a sincere question about the priesthood ban. So he did what he thought was right. He used the church's own official 2013 essay to answer it.
He used the approved material?
The officially approved material, and he was dismissed from his teaching position for it.
Wait, what? Why?
His local bishop told him, and this is a direct quote, "Anything regarding Black history before 1978 is irrelevant and a moot point." He said the essay was too much for the kids, and that church just wasn't the right venue for that discussion.
So headquarters puts out the history to be transparent, but the local leader shuts down the conversation to protect people's faith.
It's a perfect microcosm of the problem, and for you, the learner, this highlights the core struggle for a lot of members. They're taught that God will not allow the prophet to lead the church astray.
But the historical record now officially shows that prophets did teach racist, man-made theories as if they were eternal doctrine for over a century. How do you reconcile those two things?
You can't, easily. If prophets were demonstrably wrong on an issue, this central one involving curses, priesthood, salvation, it challenges the very idea of their authority on everything else they teach today.
So we've traced this incredible arc from a ban justified by the curse of Cain and premortal life to a revelation in 1978 to a modern recontextualization where the whole thing is disavowed as just bad 19th century theories.
This massive shift.
And the tension is right there in the conflict between this idea of prophetic infallibility and actual historical accountability. By saying the ban was removed by God but never put in place by God, it leaves the source of a century of pain deliberately ambiguous.
It does. It leaves members with the difficult reality that men who claim direct communication with God created and enforced a false and deeply harmful racial doctrine for 126 years.
The LDS Church today unequivocally condemns all racism. But if the reasons for the ban were never God's will, which is what the modern church is saying, here's a final thought for you to consider. Should the focus really be on the miracle of the ban being lifted in 1978? Or should it be on understanding the deep institutional failure of how it was created and then enforced by men claiming to be prophets for over a century?